I'm Luca Giliberti, contributing writer at Gold Derby, and I'm joined today by Erica Tremblay to talk about her feature film directorial debut, Fancy Dance, which she also co-wrote with Michiana Elise. And Erica, I read that you were taking part in a 3-year long language program studying the Cayuga language when you found inspiration for this movie, specifically in some of the themes that you were able to detect in the language. So, to kick things off here today, can you talk about how these themes laid the foundation for the story and then how the story kind of developed from there?
Sure. Well, scanął swojego underwajesta giaso agatsano ninanto igase. So excited to be here to talk about this movie. And of course, yes, the language that you just heard me speaking, which is Cayuga. I just basically introduced myself and said that I'm really happy to be here. I was participating in a 3-year long language immersion program. So I was studying Cayuga 8 hours a day with a cohort of 8 people. And then at night I was writing. And I had really chosen to do this program because I wanted to come back to this dream that I had to be a writer, to be a filmmaker. And I kind of thought, what a better inspiration than to kind of go back into community and back into culture. And so we lost in my community, in my reservation where I grew up as a kid, we lost our last fluent first language speaker in 1989. So I didn't grow up with the language around me other than kind of rote memorized speeches in ceremony. And so as I was learning a language, so much of it was new. And when we were learning familial words, I learned that the word for mother, it's knoha, and that the word for your mother's sister, your aunt, is knoha-a. That ah is diminutive, meaning little mother, small mother, your other mother. And learning the language kind of broke open this new relationship with my culture because the language was kind of preserved in this way that hadn't been completely changed by patriarchy or white supremacy. And so this beautiful matriarchy and this beautiful matrilineal like clan system was still so strong in the way that the words were used. Like, for
Right.
instance, a woman is if you don't know the gender of a person, it's a she. A mixed gendered group of people are all she's. So in so many ways, it's the exact opposite of English. And I was inspired to imagine a modern day where young people speak the language fluently, which isn't the case in most Haudenosaunee communities. And I was inspired to kind of I was just, I guess, really attracted to telling a mother-daughter story, but doing it by
Mhm.
way of an auntie and a niece.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so those were the building stones as we started to piece the story together.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And to kind of stay on the aspect of language still, the movie obviously switches back and forth between English and Cayuga. But the first lines of dialogue that we get in the movie, which are in the first 2-3 minutes between Jax and Roki, is in Cayuga. So, how important was it to you and Michiana that the first language we as viewers hear in the movie is Cayuga?
It's interesting because I don't think we actually explicitly thought about it. We knew how we wanted the film to open, which was the two of them kind of doing this caper together, and we see them like on the land and we see them kind of existing together. And it just felt natural that in these kind of moments where it was just the two of them together doing like in intimate settings, that they would be speaking the language to each other. And then, of course, this kind of like serene moment of them collecting medicines turns into
Right.
them stealing a wallet. And so you would use the language that no one else understands to like, hide what you're saying, which is something that you see across the film as well. They're really using the language a lot in these intimate moments, and then when they want to hide what they're saying from other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's actually stay on the opening for a moment because you already mentioned one of the first things we see Jax and Roki do is we see them stealing a fisherman's wallet and then stealing his car, which I think is such an interesting way to introduce these two protagonists to the audience. It already tells you so much about their circumstances and, more importantly, about their relationship, about how they work as a unit, I think. So, at one point in the writing process, did you land on this introduction, and what were some of the intentions and ideas behind it?
I think we just really wanted to showcase like who Jax is and kind of, you know, her value system is one that she's not going to steal from someone in the community. Like, she would never steal a wallet from an elder. But here's this like white guy who's come on their land, on their reservation, is fishing in their waters. And
Mhm.
so I think in her mind, she makes these calculations of what she believes is ethically sound. And they need money, they need to support themselves. And they kind of, she takes it she takes a lot on her shoulders, and yes, we
Yeah.
see them kind of doing this heist, if you will. And we see them doing this along the way, but they're
Mhm.
very kind of like petty crimes, like they're things that aren't necessarily hurting others. And it's really interesting because sometimes people will be, well, aren't you worried that you're showing these criminals? I'm like, have you ever seen like any like gangster movies or like, Michiana says it great where she's like, well, you watch these mafia movies and you don't like sit there and be like, oh, the Italians are being like represented
Exactly.
so negatively. And so I think like creating um dimensional characters that are
Mhm.
sometimes flawed in the decisions that they make is the kind of like drama that we're all attracted to when we watch films. And so this opening very much highlights that like depth to these kind of morally gray, areas in which Jax you know, finds herself.
Yeah, definitely. And I think something that you've also already mentioned is that from these opening moments, you can already see, or it already becomes clear that the movie is a relationship drama first and foremost, a family drama. I think you've described it as a love story that happened in the aftermath of a loss, with that loss, of course, being Roki's mother and Jax's sister Tawi. And what we get to see throughout the movie is how this relationship between Jax and Roki ebbs and flows as they each kind of embark on their own individual journey. So, can you talk a bit about how you went about balancing their perspectives and their arcs and how they maybe complement and mirror each other at times?
Yeah, I think it all comes back to their relationship to Towie. And we really wanted the two of them at the beginning of the film to have different relationships to her in terms of obviously Jax is her sister and Roki is her daughter, but also just in terms of what they know about the disappearance. For
Mm-hmm.
most of the film, Roki's really holding on to this truth that she wants to be true, which is that her mother is still alive. And as the film progresses, she starts to have a different understanding of what that means, and that also means that her aunt is lying to her. And
Mm-hmm.
so we use Towie as like the place where they are moving to and from each other. And so as Roki is coming closer to understanding the truth about her mother, she's moving further away from Jax because she's realizing that her aunt has lied to her. And so it kind of just became this um like equation of how do we pull them close, push them apart, pull them close again. And of course, in the ending is the ultimate like bringing two people back together. And we thought a lot about like rom-coms really, like in the way
Yeah.
their relationship is and how, in your typical rom-com, you're starting with, oh, they're in love and then they're fighting and then they're right, and we really thought about, and that's why we refer to it as a love story because it really is and mirrors that in so many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of takes me to my next point because what I think is really effective is that we get to experience the story through Roki's and Jax's eyes, and we get to run the gamut of emotions with them. As you said, it's not just tragedy and loss and grief. There are also a lot of moments of joy and of laughter. And I think that kind of speaks to a larger approach that you took on this film, which was to draw attention to some of the systemic issues affecting Indigenous peoples, especially women, but doing it through a very human lens. So, can you talk a bit more about that approach and specifically how it informed what presence Towie would have in this story?
Yeah, I think, I also wrote and directed on FX's Reservation Dogs. And I think one of the things that we always did in that, in the writer's room, and it wasn't necessarily a rule, but it was like anytime something really serious happened or someone said something really like vulnerable, we would need to make a joke afterward. And I think that that's very emblematic of how Indigenous people deal with these sorts of things. And if you really think about when you have gone through 500 years of genocide and forced removal and being moved from your land and having kids stolen from you and put in boarding school and you're surviving this kind of daily onslaught of trauma, you
Mhm.
find coping mechanisms. And a lot of
Absolutely.
times those coping mechanisms are family and laughing and finding ways to still experience closeness and joy. And I always find it funny when people have these like thoughts around what a reservation is or what a trailer park is or what HUD housing is. And I'm always like, what do you think happens in there that people just like sit in the dark corner of the room and cry like the whole time? But that's the way that it's been perceived
Right.
in a very anthropological way in the documentaries and like this white gaze that has been like upon Native people since the dawning of Hollywood. And I think a film like this while we still are talking about heavy topics and talking about these things that still impact modern natives today, I
Mhm.
do think it was really important for us to do it with humanity, to show that inside that trailer park, people are eating dinner and fighting with their mom and having sex with their boyfriend and like all of these things that human beings do. We
Exactly.
laugh and love, and you know, while Towie is certainly a missing person from our story, and we find out that, you know, she had that there's a tragic end to her, we see her through the eyes of these two characters that loved her
Exactly.
versus some white savior coming in or like whatever. And so like I just feel like our North Star as we were writing this was humanity and how to inject humanity into all of these characters, and laughter is such a great way to do that.
Absolutely, and that's why there are so many great. I love some of the smaller moments in the movie, especially between Jax and Roki. Like after Roki bleeds over the police officer's car, and just the laughter that they share afterwards. These very small moments, just of human interaction, and I think it just makes the story much more effective. It makes everything that you're seeing feel much more personal because again, you're seeing it through these two characters' eyes. But I did read that you actually received a note at some point in the process that Towie was not present enough in the story. What did you do with that note? Did you try to find some kind of way to incorporate her into the story? And if so, how?
Yeah, I can't remember. It was while we were going through the Sundance Labs, and so what a great place to like get notes. And it might have been Scott Frank, who was one of our advisors, and he was like, "You need to find a way to bring Towie more into the story." And it's kind of wild to think that this didn't exist in the film all the while. But we went back and we were started thinking, and you know, Towie was a dancer in a strip club, so she worked at the strip club, and that had kind of been written in there because for many years I worked as a dancer in a strip club. And
Mm.
so when we were thinking about how could we bring Towie in, I remembered this old like dance set that I used to wear, which was like this like cowgirl with like this like fringe that came down. And I was like, well, what if she finds like her mom's like jacket, like her
Mm.
stripper jacket? And I was like, this could be this really beautiful way that we see Roki like learning more about her mom that maybe would have been hidden from her, and we see her, and then I'm like, and that could like be the shawl while she dances at the end of the film, and it can also be this like piece of Towie that we see on screen that never leaves.
Yeah.
And so that's where the purple jacket came into the script. And you know, it's weird watching the movie now to think that there was ever a version of it that the script or in of the script that the jacket didn't exist. And I remember the night we were shooting that scene, I said to Isabel, I was like, when you put this jacket on, I want you to think about it as if Towie, your mother, is hugging you, and then
Mm.
you never let her let you go. And so then we see she never takes the jacket on off for the rest of the film. And so, you know, notes are great when they're good notes, and you got to always listen to them. And obviously, Scott is a genius, and he pushed us to think of ways to take it further. And I think that that was a really great solution to not have flashbacks, to not have to like go back
Exactly.
in time, but she's physically on the screen the entire, you know, the last two acts of the film.
Yeah, absolutely. You feel her presence in the movie. You don't have to show her to in order to feel her presence, and it's great to see that notes can be that helpful because it's really hard to imagine the movie with that element. So yeah, thanks for sharing that as well. And you know, coming back to the approach that I kind of mentioned, I also feel like it kind of applies to the landscape, to the setting, because even though the setting in the movie obviously becomes a site of tragedy, probably has been a site of tragedy, I couldn't help but notice, or I found that it was captured with such admiration and reverence. And I know that you shot the film on Cherokee Nation land. So, what was that experience like, and how did that experience influence the way you wanted to capture and present this setting, this landscape to viewers?
It was really important to shoot this film in Oklahoma. You know, that's where my nation is. That's where I spent most of my life. And um, I had worked on reservation dogs, and so we had shot reservation dogs in and around Tulsa, Muskogee Creek, Turkey lands.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just made a lot of sense because the crew base is there, and it was crew that I had already worked with. and also the Cherokee Nation Film Office. We were the first film to receive their film incentive.
Right.
And so they have this great infrastructure at the Cherokee Nation Film Office where they have a locations Bible and you can go through and pick locations, and they're very supportive. And so it was a wonderful experience to have, you know, a predominantly Native crew with a Native cast and shooting on Native lands. And in fact, the home that we shot for Jackson Roke's home,
Mhm.
that is our set designer's aunt's house. You know, so we
Wow.
were actually shooting in like family members' spaces, and you know, the women who lived in that house had lost their matriarch not too long ago. And in the film, her picture is on the mantle where it sits normally. And so these spaces felt so real for us. And, you know, I find that I like to engage with community very early on. I send drafts of scripts to elders, to our cultural director, to, you know, I bring in faith keepers very early on, because I find that the more collaborative the process is from the beginning, the more authentic and the more real and the more responsible the work becomes or is. And you know, we took that all the way through to where we chose to shoot the film as well.
Yeah, I think I had read somewhere that there were like 180 Indigenous cast and crew members altogether on the project, right? So that having the environment both in front and behind the camera, I'm sure that must have been a really extraordinary experience.
Yeah, and just to say it, you know, I had prior to shooting the film, I'd been having a conversation with Adam Perrone, who now runs the Indigenous Lab at Sundance, and we were trying to count up how many fiction narrative feature films have been made since Smoke Signals in 1999.
Mhm.
Not counting, we're talking just the US, and we couldn't come up with
Right.
10.
Wow.
And when you think about that, and then you look at like what has happened with Billy Luther's film and all the stuff Sidney Freeland's been doing and all the stuff Sterling Harjo had been building up over these years, you know, what a true gift it is to be on a set like that, on a film that is written and directed by Native folks, and then to be able to bring in and like employ and include and collaborate with other Native folks. It's truly it's a gift, and it's also something that we hope we can continue, because we don't want to go back. We don't want to wait another 20 years to have
Of
like three
course.
films come out. And I think that if anything, the film started to become something that wasn't just about me as a filmmaker or Michiana or, you know, the actors. It was like, this now gets to be added to that list. Like it now
Right.
exists in the canon of filmmaking. And that is very special.
Yeah, I can imagine. And before we wrap things up here, I do want to talk about the ending of the movie because the movie ends with Jackson Roke reuniting at the powwow and dancing together in the annual Missing and Murdered Memorial Dance. And there's so many emotions that come together here, right? There's the tragedy of Towie's loss. There's the uncertainty of Jax's and Roke's fates. But there's also this sense of closure and dare I say, a sense of joy that's there, that's present. So, how did you go about framing this ending, and what were some of the conversations you had with Lily Gladstone and Isabel DeRoy Olsen in terms of what you wanted them to convey here?
That scene was always going to be that scene, and I think that that's that when I had the mother and small mother with the language, I immediately imagined like two women dancing, and then it became, well, how do we get them there? So I'm glad that I never had to negotiate with myself, or Michiana and I never had to negotiate what the ending would be. Like the ending
Mhm.
always was going to be the ending. And I think that given everything that we've kind of talked about in this conversation, we wanted them to have a moment of triumph. We wanted
Right,
them to have a moment of joy, a moment of closeness. And we know that when the credits roll, that like the corrupt wheels of justice are going to continue turning and that their fates aren't going to be great. But we know that in this moment that they've been able to come together and say goodbye in this very, very like culturally specific way. We know they're going to be okay. And I think that it was really important that we like never show a dead body. We never
right,
talk in graphic detail about how Tawi lost her life. And that it was more about personal connection and like the relationships between these two women and how they overcame that tragedy in this moment of dance. And, you know, we had 2 weeks of dance lessons
wow,
and language lessons in pre-production, and the woman who you see on the missing posters is
hmm,
actually their dance instructor. And
wow,
That's Halle Sue Gray, and she's also the one that helped us put the powwow on. And so there was just this feeling of, we know that woman, and we were looking at this picture of her, and we love this woman who has taught us these, like, how to dance. And so we really just talked a lot about that moment of them coming back together was a moment of them to properly say goodbye, but then also to properly say I love you, which is something that not in native spaces sometimes you can't get the words out, but that
Mhm.
in these cultural moments of dance and ceremony, that's how you're showing your love. And I have a hard time watching the film just because it it's so emotionally, like, draining in the way that it was to make it as well. Also, I see all the things I would do different, but that's for a different question. But that ending, every time we kind of like walk in at the end of the film when we're getting ready to do panels or Q&As or whatever, I can't help but cry. And I am so glad that Roki, or that I'm really so glad that the incredible Lily Gladstone and the amazing newcomer Isabel Droy Olsen um, were able to so beautifully depict these two women in this moment of joy and closeness at the end of the film. It really is something that I'm proud of, adding to that canon of film, native film.
Yeah. Yeah, and you should be. It's really such a beautiful way to conclude the story, and also to honor the characters, and to honor the entire story that's being told here. So yeah, I absolutely loved it.
Nobody wanted
Um,
to see those characters like get pulled away in handcuffs.
no,
Like, no one needed that.
absolutely not. It's really the way the movie is bookended. If you think about how the movie starts and about how it ends, it's about this relationship, and I think that ending is a perfect, like I said, it's a perfect way to honor that relationship, to honor the community. Erica, thank you so much for taking the time today to talk about this movie. Congratulations on the success, and yeah, it was really such a pleasure talking to you about it.
Great. Thank you so much. And great to meet you too.